All right, everybody, back with another one. This is going to be a special episode. This is the Christmas episode of the podcast dedicated to the Christmas holiday and just going to be a fun, loose episode where we go over some, cool historical things that pertain to the Christmas holiday and just sort of, how those things came about. We're going to have fun. We're going to just you know, enjoy the Christmas season. Hopefully you're on vacation or you're spending the holiday with family, friends, loved ones, and just, listening to this in the background or in your headphones while you're cooking and getting stuff ready for the holiday. Just hopefully have a little fun with this one. Just enjoy and nothing too deep, thinking too hard or, deep research on anything. For this episode, we're just gonna, keep it loose, keep it fun. um, we're going to look at some um, historical stuff. We're also going to take a look at something from pop culture today that has been floating around on social media, and we'll get into that in a minute. First, I want to say, don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, share, all that good stuff that I always say. It really helps the channel grow, and we have a lot of, big plans for the future of this podcast, especially for, next year. Going into next year, we'd like to expand and make the studio a little bit better. Minor things with the background just to add some stuff to it, so it's not just me in front of a backdrop. But we're going to hopefully build the studio out a little bit more. Definitely would like to have on more guests. We had our guest Anthony Volpe on in the past several times, and he'll probably be on future episodes. But we definitely want to have more guests on the channel. So, subscribing and all that stuff really does help. Give us the ability to reach out to guests and get them on the channel. Liking, sharing, all that stuff. If you see that there's an episode that has a topic or something that pertains to somebody that you know and you think it would be good for them, send it to them, let them, check it out. Uh, if there is a guest that you'd like to see us have on or a topic you'd like to see us talk about, definitely put that in the comments. I do like to hear from you guys. So, let me know if there are things that you'd like to see on this channel and we'll definitely consider it. Um, as we wrap up the shopping part of the season, which, at the time that this is going to be released, it's going to be released during Christmas week. So it's already too late to place orders for any of the products and get it in time for Christmas. But there are, people who give gifts later after the holiday and they're okay. If it shows up late, they give it during the Christmas break, before New Year's or shortly after the New Year. I know, people do that nowadays because everybody's getting things shipped in from all over the world and it takes time and not everything can get there by the holiday. So, if you do want to order some of this stuff, you could actually ship it directly to the person that you are gifting it to. And, it could save you some time with waiting to get it to your location and then, wrap it and send it to the other person. You're not going to get it in time for Christmas by now, but if you did want to order the stuff from the apparel shop, the stuff from our Amazon storefront, and especially my children's book, we will definitely be continuing to ship stuff out. And there's definitely no guarantee we can get it to you before the end of the year. But if you place your orders now, you might still get it in December and be able to give it to them during the Christmas season still. With that said, definitely check out the book, my children's book, Little Boy Full of Love. It's a really great book, really wonderful stories, life lessons that are perfect for, young children, especially if you have a son or know somebody that, has a small child that you would like to, gift them this to read to them as a good children's book with moral life lessons. It makes for a great gift, makes for a great, wonderful gift for anybody that might want that type of gift. And it's on sale right now on all the major platforms, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walmart, everywhere that, typically books can be found. So definitely, check that out, get your orders in now, and you might be able to get it before the end of the year. With that said, the first thing I want to do is jump into this story that's been going around social media for quite a while, but it's fitting to talk about it now because it is the holiday season. And that is the story of the Home Alone house from the movie being renovated to look more modern. So we'll take a look at some of the pictures as to what that looks like compared to the way the house actually was in the movie. and then we'll, read some good news that's actually coming out of this. So this has been floating around on social media. A lot of people have commented that they were upset that the change had occurred. Um, and, you know, obviously this was a big part of the, people who grew up in the 90s, their childhood. Home Alone was one of the biggest movies that had come out, pertaining to Christmas. And this obviously upset a lot of millennials. But at the end of the day, you have to realize that this is a piece of real estate. It's a real home. It wasn't entirely a set. There was a lot of things about that movie that were, fake sets. The home the neighbor's house that they ended up flooding when the sticky bandit guys, the bad guys, let all the water run and flooded the house and the basement got flooded. That was actually a fake set, I believe, built in a swimming pool, and so that was a fake house. But the Home Alone house where, the character Kevin McAllister actually lived was a real home, I believe, in Chicago. And, in a nice neighborhood. It was a home that they liked. They picked it, so they ended up staging it out for the movie. But this was a real home, and the owners at one point decided to sell, and they wanted to, whoever, was doing the job, either the seller or, somebody was flipping it, decided to renovate it, and they ended up renovating it to look a lot more modern. So this is a side-by-side comparison, the way that it used to look in the 90s with the movie, and then the way they renovated it. And it's funny because it looks like every other home today. The renovations are very modern. You could tell this was done in a way to, attract what the market is calling for today, which is just very modern, basic, black and white tones, and everything's very plain. There's no carpet on the staircase. There's no wallpaper with designs. It's just, you know, very simple, modern, colors and design style. But this is another picture of the bedroom. That was the bedroom where, he hid under the covers because he was afraid that somebody was trying to break into his house. And then I guess this is how they renovated it to look a lot more modern. This is the famous kitchen. Many scenes in that movie. He's shooting the gun, BB gun. Daniel Stern's character trying to break in through the little doggy door, and they renovated it to this, I believe, which is a lot more modern. You got the slate, whether it's granite or whatever that material is, that stone. They did a very you know island countertop today. Back in the day, they used to have all these, little tiles, and the islands look a lot different now. Everything is very much like, granite or slate or some sort of stone where it's just all one piece. And they definitely looks a lot more modern today than the way that it was in the 90s. I believe this is another room from the movie, possibly the room where they were trying to peeking through the window where the Christmas tree was. I think this might have been that room where the Christmas tree was in this corner. And these are the renovations. A lot more modern than what they used to look like. So that's the story on the Home Alone house. A lot of controversy online. A lot of people were upset with the renovations. And now we can see that those renovations are apparently going to be reversed from the new owner of the house and restored back to what they, looked like when the movie. And I'm assuming that, probably was done, it probably was already renovated several times, because why would you renovate it to that modern look just to have the buyer restored back to the way that it looked in the movie? Doesn't would have been a waste of money. So that home probably was renovated already. Might have even been multiple times by the time it finally made it to this new owner in 2025. So that to me sounds like why it's being renovated again in this situation, when they probably could have just sold it as is in that condition, the way that it looked in the movie. But that movie came out 30 years ago, practically, and it probably, like I said, the house has been renovated multiple times. So everybody's freaking out online, and they're thinking that it went from the way that it looked in the Home Alone movie to the modern look that it was renovated in those pictures. And I think that's probably not the case. It probably was renovated several times between now and then. And, just goes to show you that a lot of times people just get very emotional and caught up in these things that we see on the internet, that you don't know the whole backstory because everything is so short in these posts and you're just scrolling and you make up stories in your head based on a picture or a video because the way that it's presented to you, it wants you to feel a certain way or think a certain thing. And this is sort of the beauty of art, and especially, movies, feature films. They have the ability to make you think and feel a certain way without sometimes even dialogue, without the characters even talking. And that is the power that art has over us. But now with social media, it's taken on, a whole new way that the ability that it has, where a picture or a series of pictures can make people think a certain way or feel a certain way or freak out. And if you don't have the whole context, sometimes that can be, you know, very emotionally and mentally stressful. And I think that's part of the reason why this generation is so stressed out. Social media has a lot, which is why I said last time too. Um, I will start integrating some book reviews into the podcast episodes, occasionally. I'm going to try and do maybe at least one a month where I just sort of review a book. It's not really going to be your typical book review like some of these other channels do. It's going to be more about, books that I've read or am reading and my take on great points that the author makes or something really interesting from the book. I'm not going to go into detail and expose that writer's work, but I am going to tell a little bit about something that maybe even I learned from it and share that with you because I think it's very needed today for people to read books again, for people to get back to actually holding a physical book in their hand, not a Kindle, not a tablet, with another screen, because everything is just screens today. We go from our phone screen, the laptop screen, a tablet screen, to the TV screen, and everything is screens today. And we're forgetting that there are other ways to get information in than, you know, all these screens. And, back in the day, there were so many different forms of that. We had books, newspapers, magazines, everything. So I want to start integrating it because I think we need to get the younger generation to read books again, physical books. I think it's so important, and it's important for many different reasons. There are definitely health effects that the screens constantly in our face and the social media and the short clips of things are stressing people out. But I think it's also damaging our brains and the neurons and all the processes that our brain, because our brain is sort of like a computer in its own way as well. It's damaging a lot of that stuff. And books offer our brains a different type of challenge that really does help the brain grow, help the neurons, helps, the whole process of the brain's development that you just can't get from a screen, especially when you're reading, you know, a book that is well researched, well sourced, well written. You're getting information that an author put together, worked really hard to, accurately research and get all this information, gather it, compile it, source through it, and then refine it into one work that you can read through from beginning to end, and it puts all the pieces of the puzzles together. That's something that social media really doesn't offer. Everything on social media is quick bursts. So, with that said, my book today is actually a Christmas themed book to keep it in the spirit of the episode. And it's a book called The Case for Christmas. You can see that by an author, Lee Strobel, who's on the back right there. It's a small book. It's not a big book. It's a really not a big read either, very thin. So you could breeze through it in, you know, probably just this first couple of days of Christmas. If you read it on Christmas Eve, you'll probably be done with it by the end of the week. And it's less than 100 pages long. It's actually 87 pages long if you're not including a lot of the ending stuff. So it's um it's a good book. I think it's really cool. It's an interesting take on Christmas and sort of some of the stuff that the traditions and where they come from and in line with what we're talking about today. So that's why I thought I would share it. But that's another book that I'd like to recommend to the audience as, a Christmas themed book for the holiday season. I don't know where it's sold. It's definitely sold at a bunch of physical stores. If you can't get it online and get it in time for the holidays to gift it to somebody, you might be able to pick it up at one of the big retailers. So look into where the closest one is to you, but it's a book that I recommend, and that is my book recommendation for this week. All right, so we're going to get into now the holiday stuff. This is going to be a little bit of Christmas themed, not so much trivia, but just sort of taking a look at where some of the stuff that we celebrate that has to do with Christmas or, different things that are part of the Christmas theme overall. Where did these things originally come from? Where did they originate? And how did they end up part of the Christmas holiday season? So I don't have a bunch of detailed notes. I just have some little notes I've made about several different things here. And a lot of it's not really deep researched. It's stuff that I've researched over time and then further research for this episode. So it's probably 85 to 90% accurate. There's a chance that some of it might be a little bit not totally accurate because I'm sure there are more sources that and when it comes to historical stuff like this, it's hard because you can't really pinpoint the first time for everything specifically, and there's a lot of like folklore that gets mixed in with the Christmas holiday season. So some people say some stuff dates back to different eras and different groups of people and different periods in history, and you can't always confirm 100%, but it's mostly accurate. But we're gonna go through them. This is first. We'll start with the three wise men, which a lot of people, have heard this in different ways. They've been called the three kings, the magi, and the wise men. And essentially, what they were was just astrologers. They were people who, studied the patterns of the stars. And at that time in history, people who had like philosophical or scientific careers, which really it's not the same. Like, they did those things back then, and it wasn't necessarily always a career. It was just what they did with their lives. They had been held in high esteem. A lot of people really respected people like that because it was a unique thing to do with your life, a unique choice for your job, I guess you would say. And it was something that was a skill that had to be taught and passed down to you because there wasn't as much information available and they didn't have computers. A lot of times they didn't have access to books even. So it would be hard to break into a new industry or something like that and learn it, become an expert at it if somebody didn't teach you. So a lot of times the jobs that people did, they were mentored by somebody else who had come before them, and then they became that thing. So the people who were astrologers were really respected at that time because it was um, helpful to know how to like look at the stars and look at the planets and look at space and look at nature and be able to figure out things that would help further advance science and technology. A lot of times people call them kings. They weren't kings. They were simply just astrologers. And that's why God had, you know, pointed them to the star, the famous star in the story of the birth of Jesus, because he knew that they would understand, they would get it, that star, they would know how to track that star to where Jesus was being born. And that was, they followed that in order to find him. And, it became part of the Jesus's birth story. Also, another thing I wanted to say too is that's what the whole Christmas season is about. I think there's also a lot of people online as well that are, there's not a war, but a huge disagreement between celebrating Christmas. And many people are saying that Christmas is how could you not celebrate Christmas? It's more than just a Christian holiday. It's an American tradition. It's a global tradition. And then some people are saying that Christmas is evil. It comes from, you know, pagan and other cultures, roots in the way they worship their false gods. And there's elements of truth to everything, but Christmas itself is not evil. And all of the things that we'll talk about, today, a lot of these traditions, they're not evil themselves. And every single thing does not root back to an evil thing that bad people were doing to worship their false gods. There are some times where that happens, but there's also some times where it doesn't happen, and it's just something that the, you know, Christians or the Catholics or whoever at that time had thought would be a fun thing to do to, celebrate Jesus in their little way. And it's, I think, a little sometimes people that are constantly on the internet, constantly on social media, get so caught up in the trends or the conflict. And, the news does this all the time because negativity sells and positivity doesn't. That's why the news is always negative. They're always talking about everything that's wrong with the world. And they rarely talk about anything good because that stuff doesn't keep people glued to the screens. It's the same thing with social media. There's a lot of negativity out there, and there's a lot of people who get caught up in the hype of, you know, finding the conspiracy and everything. And that's fine to look just to know the truth, but just don't get so caught up in it because it will steal your joy in life. And that's not what the Christmas season is about. The Christmas season is and should always be about Christ, the birth of Christ. Now, people will say things about his actual birthday not being the 25th of December, and there's no accurate way to prove that because nobody has the actual date, at least until this point in history. Nobody's discovered the actual date, but there's a reason why his birthday has been long-standingly accepted as December 25th. And regardless of what we have in terms of documentation, is it at all possible that God has presented that date to us and we accepted it because it really was the date? We don't know the date. So is it at all possible that God has revealed the date to us in one way or another and that it actually is the date? But either way, it doesn't matter because you can celebrate somebody's life without celebrating it on their actual birthday, right? You can celebrate and appreciate someone regardless of if it's their birthday or not. So the whole getting caught up in the 25th of December, who cares? Christmas should be about celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ. You can do and partake in all the other traditions as long as you don't go the way of the pagans, which is where they made false gods, false idols, and then worship them. That's the trap that people fall into. But if you have a tree in your living room with decorations on it, that doesn't make you not a Christian. That doesn't make you evil. That doesn't make you worshiping false gods. But if you're the type of person that gets so obsessed, like some of these moms out there in the world, just for example, get so obsessed with their decorations that the children, it's like a museum in the house and you can't touch anything and the kids can't enjoy and goof around or, have fun decorating the tree together. Instead, the mom has to do it all because it has to be perfect. That could fall into idol worship where the decorations and the season becomes the thing that you worship, and Jesus now takes a back seat. So my whole point with that is just that, and I said I wouldn't get like too deep into this episode, but it always seems to happen just because there's a lot to talk about and there's a lot of dots that get connected. The season should just be at its core in your life, if you're a believer, Jesus first, his birth, his life, and then you can enjoy the other things. Then you can enjoy all of the stuff that makes Christmas what it is. But that's all I'll say on that topic. We'll continue with this, but on that note, I do have a little red on to celebrate for Christmas, the Christmas theme, and I also have here a Merry Christmas mug. So I do have my, and that's not merch. That's just stuff that I have to fit the theme of this episode and you know show that I have the Christmas spirit for this. The next thing is going to be Saint Nicholas. So we all know that Saint Nicholas is the real person that Santa Claus was based on. And so a lot of people, that name. They've heard it 1,000 times in popular culture and things associated with Santa, but that is essentially where the Santa Claus character comes from, is a real life person that had lived at one point, Saint Nicholas, and that he was a really good human being, a very decent guy, would go out there and do a lot of charity, which is a huge part of the church, the Christian culture, Catholic culture as well, is charity, being charitable, but also he was known for giving a lot of gifts. And he would just randomly give gifts to people without them even knowing or asking. And that was sort of what established the Santa Claus character being modeled after him and where the whole gift giving came from. But if you didn't know, which a lot of people don't know, when Saint Nicholas actually lived. So this is allegedly what we have documented. The actual person, Saint Nicholas, lived between 270 AD and 343 AD. So essentially, the years 270 to 343 is apparently when he was born and died. Now, think about that in context. It's like 250 years after Jesus had been, crucified and died. He was resurrected and left again. You're talking only 250 years after Christ came that St. Nicholas walked the earth and officially started to kick off what we would know to become Santa Claus. So Santa Claus, really the idea of it, dating back to St. Nicholas, goes back about as close as Jesus himself as you can get. Now, I'm not comparing St. Nicholas or Santa to Jesus because Christ is, truly the reason for the season, as they say. But Santa, St. Nicholas, gifts, all that stuff, it all does sort of tie into Christmas. It all does sort of go back to Jesus and to, you know, that whole concept. So there is, Christmas is just as much a traditional holiday as it is a religious holiday, and it should remain that way. We shouldn't get caught up in the materialism of the world, but we should enjoy, uh, you know, the Christmas season and the holiday and celebrate a lot of the traditions that are tied to it. And if you look at Jesus too, the wise men that I just spoke about, they came and they delivered gifts to Jesus. They brought frankincense, gold, and myrrh, as we know. And they were giving gifts to God essentially. So gifts have always been a part of the Christmas tradition. And it started with, it started before Jesus because people used to give each other gifts before, but it was solidified and pretty much became a part of the holiday and the season. With Jesus himself, people gave gifts to Jesus, and that is part of the Christmas tradition in this world. So, all that stuff really is Christian at its core, to some degree. But I thought that was interesting. And if you're wondering where St. Nicholas was, he was the bishop of Myra, which essentially is Turkey today. So he essentially was a man who lived in Turkey, the country. It wasn't Turkey at that time, but that's the landmass where it is now. Next one is gingerbread cookies, gingerbread men, things like that. So the original recipe for gingerbread uh, apparently goes back to ancient Greece, 2400 BC. So that's 2400 years before Christ, thousands of years before even Jesus. Ancient Greeks used to eat bacony gingerbread. So it's been a thing that we've been doing in, world civilization since almost the beginning. I mean, really, really long time ago. But the actual cookies and things like that apparently go back to the medieval era, the 1500s, when I believe it was the Germans, but I could be wrong, started making them into, cookies and treats and things like that. So that's where that comes from. Now we have decorating Christmas trees, which again is another big thing that people talk about it on the internet as a pagan idol worship thing, but there are elements of it that go back to Germany in the 1600s, where they used to actually put fruits and nuts on trees outside. And I believe when they would fall to the ground or something, it would signify that spring was coming, and it would just be sort of like a tradition that they would do to welcome in the new season. But then eventually in the 1800s, well, before that, they started bringing them indoors and putting the trees up in their homes and decorating them with the same thing, fruits and nuts and things like that, to continue that tradition of the the seasons changing. But in the 1800s, the first actual ornaments were manufactured. They were little glass balls. That's where the glass balls come from. And they were done specifically for decorating a tree. So essentially, actual ornaments that were manufactured for trees date back to the 1800s, and the first ones were really glass balls. So a lot of people have those on their trees today as filler ornaments, and then they have a whole bunch of other ornaments that are more personalized, like pictures of their family or whatever. But the first ornaments were pretty much just glass balls. Next thing is the Nutcracker. Well, the Nutcracker is a huge part of Christmas tradition as well, especially in Europe. And it is something that the actual Nutcracker tool was apparently invented in the third or fourth century AD for, using it to actually crack open nuts. But then later on, the figures that look like soldiers or kings or whatever that are hand carved, usually from wood and painted. Those were around the 16 to 1700s in Germany. They started making these like decorative figurines that were also practical because they would use them to actually crack open nuts. So if you've ever seen the Nutcracker, you see that it has that little lever in the back and the mouth opens and then the mouth closes when you press the lever down. Probably not as much today because a lot of things are mass produced and manufactured. But back in the day, they used to make them from wood hand carved and they were practical. You could actually use them to crack open nuts. You'd put the nut in the mouth of the nutcracker and press the lever down, and it would crack the nut open. And nuts were a really big snack that people would eat all throughout history. I don't think people do as much anymore because things are really mass produced and manufactured. You probably eat like maybe like trail mix or something, but people used to crack open. I remember when I was growing up, we used to, you know, get, for the holiday season, we would get like a bag of walnuts that were still in the shell or a bag of almonds or something, or the mix with all the different nuts. And we would, hand crack them all open one by one and eat them. And it was cool because it felt like, something that really wasn't done much anymore. So it sort of felt like a throwback to, you know, back in the day, um, and it sort of fit in with the holiday season. But they actually used to, crack the nuts open and, use the little Nutcracker doll to do that. So that was kind of cool. And then the actual Nutcracker story. So eventually, folklore and stuff became, created out of that. And it was a story called The Nutcracker and the Mouse King, was written and published in 1816. And then later out of that, 1892, you had the Russian ballet, The Nutcracker, which still runs today. It's still a very big, you know, uh, art form, I guess, artwork where people go and see the Nutcracker, the ballet, in the theaters. Another one is eggnog. So this is a cool one. Originally, it was called, I guess, posset, Posset. What it was essentially warm milk that was mixed with wine. So that was pretty much what they were doing back then because, those days, this goes back, I don't even know how long ago, but ancient times. They used to just take milk because we've had milk since the beginning of time and wine. We've had that. One of the earliest alcoholic beverages we've ever had is wine. I think it might be the first. And they just used to add it to warm milk that they would, boil on a pot or something. And that's how eggnog originally was invented in this precursor called posset. But then later on, monks, I think, started adding eggs to it to thicken it up and give it a more of a custard feel. And that's where it gets the name egg from, because they would actually add eggs to it. And in about the late 1700s in America, the name was actually coined eggnog. So eggnog is probably one of the first or earliest Christmas traditions that is actually technically invented in America. Now, the drink itself was not. It predates America, but the name eggnog comes from, as far as I know from, this research, comes from America. So that was our contribution to the Christmas tradition at that time from the very early founding of our country. And I think the year was actually 1775. So the year before the actual nation was formed, during the, I guess during the Revolutionary War, they're making and coining the term eggnog while they're fighting for their lives. Next, we have gingerbread houses. So we already know, gingerbread itself, ancient recipe, then gingerbread cookies. I guess that was the Victorian era and the medieval times. In 1812, gingerbread houses were apparently a thing, and then people started, I guess, making them at some point using gingerbread cookies. But the gingerbread house was apparently taken from the house that the witch had in the story Hansel and Gretel, which was published in 1812, because the witch's house was made out of bread, cake, and sugar. So apparently that's where the actual house concept comes from. And then now you have today, a couple hundred years later, baking shows on the holidays on like, Netflix and all the streaming apps where they build gingerbread houses in a competition against each other. So interesting little, thing there, but that goes back to the early 1800s. And then you'll see too, a lot of stuff comes out of the 1800s in regards to Christmas. That was a really big time for people, especially in both Europe and America, for contributing a lot of new things to the Christmas season. And I think it had to do with post-war. It was, I mean, 1812, you had the War of 1812 and you had other things too, but pretty much at that point, it was understood that America was established. It wasn't going anywhere. It was a country that was going to be its own nation. And Great Britain was sort of changing and starting to, shake up and become a different nation, which would eventually be Europe and all these other countries that are part of it. So at that time, I think it was probably more just a different era where people weren't warring as much because during the 1800s was a really good time where there wasn't as many wars. You did have the Civil War, you did have other wars like that, like I just mentioned, but there was a lot of economic prosperity. There was a lot of industrialization and growth. That was an era where you had, trains were invented and established, and it changed the landscape of, distribution and, connecting, travel in not just America, but in Europe as well. And then you also had, you know, the bulb, the telephone, electricity, all these things came out of pretty much the 1800s, even cars. So it was a really prosperous and industrial revolutionary time where people were really inventing a lot of things. And I think it was probably just a time where people were just, enjoying life, exploring and, I don't know, just, doing a lot of cool things. A lot of great stuff came out of the 1800s, but it's probably the century where the most amount of things, of traditions were contributed to the Christmas season is probably from the 1800s. Santa Claus. So now this is the first time you essentially have the character of Santa Claus, and it's 1823. The poem, which we all know, is A Visit from St. Nicholas. And this is where, you know, this is the famous poem everybody knows, and it's become a part of pop culture, but it was apparently published by an unknown author, and then later on, the author who actually wrote it republished it under his name to make sure he got the credit for it. So allegedly, it was Clement Clark Moore is the name of the author, and he's the one who wrote it. And this is where you first see all of this stuff get compiled together and associated with Santa Claus, who was based on St. Nicholas, and that's the sleighs, Santa's sleigh, his reindeer, and their names. That's when you first hear all of the reindeer's names, Comet, Cupid, things like that, stockings, chimneys, all that stuff. It all comes from that poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas. And we've all heard and read that 1,000 times before. So Santa Claus and that, all the things I just mentioned pretty much really began and became a part of the Christmas season in 1823 because of that poem. And it's so funny because you think back throughout history from ancient times, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, different eras of civilizations where poets were a really big part of society and they really helped influence the culture. And, there are plenty of poems that we still read and know of today that are thousands of years old. But today, not so much. Poems are kind of lame. Nobody really cares about them anymore. They get, published in little poetry magazines and books and stuff, but that's pretty much the only time you ever hear about them. But at one point in society, they were really impactful and they really helped change the culture, push the culture in a certain direction. And it's kind of funny that, Santa Claus and the reindeer and all that stuff, which is still part of the holiday tradition today, came from a poem. So now this is another one. You have Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, which everybody knows is the story of Scrooge and that whole thing. Great addition to the Christmas tradition. I actually have another book that I would recommend. I have a printed copy of the original, not the first edition or anything. It's just a reprinted copy of the original Christmas Carol written by Charles Dickens, the one that was actually written by him, not reprinted and produced from his work. It's the one that was published by him. It's a great book because it's obviously has been turned into so many different things throughout, time, different, cultural things. Everybody sort of did their spin on it, but it's a great story because it's the story of which I would consider a follow up on Saint Nicholas, where he was a charitable man. He would go out and give people gifts and do all kinds of cool things and help out his fellow man, which is a very biblical thing, by the way. Love your neighbor as yourself. And, you had this other story of the Christmas Carol Scrooge, who was this, mean old guy who all he cared about was money. Nobody liked him, but they all needed him because they needed his money and his resources. And then his heart was transformed when the three spirits, met with him, and he eventually ended up becoming very charitable, giving away his money, helping people out, and he sort of became like a Saint Nicholas. So that's kind of cool that that story went full circle, the Christmas Carol, and it's a huge part of our Christmas tradition today. But it was originally released December 19th, 1843. So about a week before Christmas back then, 1843. Again, I said a lot of stuff came out of the 1800s that is related to Christmas today. So now you have candy canes. Candy canes were obviously around for a long time. It's just a sugar stick, but eventually it got turned into an actual shepherd's staff shaped like an upside down J. And, I think that had to do with the shepherds that were also called to see Jesus when he was born. And there's a lot that goes into all that, but I guess the shape of it was styled after that, as a reference to the shepherds. But it was originally, I think it originated around the mid to late 1600s as an actual candy, but then the actual candy came as a not only a treat but a decorative part of the Christmas season where a lot of people used to also hang them on their trees. It was a decoration and they're all individually wrapped in like a plastic wrap, but at one point, I don't know what they were before we had plastic wrap. They used to hang them on their trees as decoration. In fact, I even remember my grandmother doing that, when I was a child. She would hang them on her tree and it was part of the tradition in that side of my family. Those were first, invented and shaped and designed allegedly in 1847. So we have candy canes again, another part of the Christmas season in the 1800s. Now we have the when did Santa get elves? When did he become, a character who lived in the North Pole? Like where did all that stuff come from? Well, apparently it came from a cartoonist named Thomas Nast, who wrote for a publication called Harper's Weekly, and he published a, little cartoon about Santa having elves and being part of from the North Pole, and that's where he was stationed in 1860s to the 1880s. I don't exactly know when the first one was released, but I think it might have been a series of cartoons and then eventually became so popular that it became part of the Christmas tradition as well. But again, 1800s. That was around the 1860s to the 1880s whenever he was working for that publication. And so that's how elves in the North Pole got part of the Christmas season, I guess. Now we'll go into more modern, forms of art that has the Christmas, roots in of the Christmas season. So one of the oldest and most popular Christmas movies, which is really at the very, very early part of filmmaking in America, is It's a Wonderful Life, which is a Christmas classic. but it's probably the oldest Christmas themed or movie that's based around the Christmas season out of any feature film. I mean, there's not many that are older than that are about the Christmas season and as big of a movie that still to this day we watch as part of the lineup of Christmas movies. And it's a great movie, really, if you ever have a chance to see it if you haven't. It's a wonderful movie. It is in black and white. I think at one point they remastered it in color as well, so you could also watch it in color if you don't like black and white. But it came out in 1946. Funny story about that. I actually sat in. There's a movie, I mean, there's a scene in the movie where the lead character is in the back of a sort of like a taxi cab for that day. And it's an old 19, I guess, 30s car that eventually later was retired and brought to a car museum. And I actually sat in the back of that car that was actually in the movie that Jimmy Stewart, the actor, sat in. I sat in the back. I have a picture of me and my family in the car, sitting in the back seat where Jimmy Stewart sat during the shooting of that movie. So, just a little personal take on my connection to that movie, which I thought was kind of cool to be able to, have that experience because, the car is like 100 years old and a real famous actor had sat in the back of it during the shooting of a movie, which is still to this day an iconic Christmas movie. So that's my connection with that. But that actually wasn't the first Christmas movie ever. Now, I don't know the very first ever, but I think this is the very first ever. I mean, I haven't done extensive research, but this is about as far back as I could find a movie that was specifically made in regards to Christmas. And this is a movie called Santa Claus, oddly enough, from 1898. Now, it wasn't a feature film, but it was apparently made by Georges Méliès in France. It was a 1 to 2 minute short silent film. So, way back in the day, movies before they had sound and color. They were actually black and white and had no sound. And this, in the early years of filmmaking, which was the late 1800s, a lot of short films got made because cameras were just coming out and people started messing around with them and just doing whatever they could. I've watched a lot of old, short films from the very early years in the late 1800s of when cameras first came out, were first invented, and the type of stuff that people were filming with them, which was just everyday stuff. I think I remember there's a famous movie, not famous, but in the film community, it's well known, I guess, of a guy who his first film was he put the camera on his bicycle and rode around on his bicycle, and it was like Man on a Bike or Man on a Bicycle or something, like whatever the name of the movie was. It was a well known, really really old, you know, first era film that was something that people later studied as the origins of filmmaking. And this would actually fall into that. So I find it kind of interesting that late 1800s, I mean, it's almost 1900, 1898, but the late 1800s, cameras were just invented. People just started doing filmmaking and all this stuff. And already somebody thought, let's make a Christmas movie, a little short 2 minute film about Santa Claus. And that was a thought that somebody had when we were just figuring out this thing. They're already integrating a holiday, Christmas season topic or theme into the movie to shoot it. So that's apparently the first and oldest Christmas movie is Santa Claus from 1898. Then you look at Christmas music. Well, where did that come from? When did that, originate? Obviously Christmas music goes back to, people singing, Christians singing hymns, in praise and honor of God, in praise and honor of Jesus Christ and, his birth and him being the Messiah and coming to save us. And a lot of them were also part of the years after Christ had already been, executed and resurrected and stuff like that. But in the fourth century AD, there was a Christmas hymn called Jesus Refulsit Omnium, which is apparently one of the first official songs that was put together specifically as a Christmas theme song, I guess. But the first ever recorded Christmas song that was actually recorded on, in an audio, well, I'll get to that in a second, but in audio form where people could actually play it back and listen, not a live performance, was actually Jingle Bells. And it was recorded by um, the Edison Male Quartet, which was an old group back in the late 1800s. So again, oddly enough, the same year the Santa Claus movie came out in 1898, this group recorded Jingle Bells on a wax cylinder. So this is before records, before all of that old stuff that we look at as, dinosaur today. Obviously some of it's making a comeback like record players and stuff, but on vinyl records. But before that, people used to record on wax and, they used to pour wax, let it get hard, and then they would carve out grooves just like a record has, and they were able to get the audio to stay somehow, which is so amazing by itself, just thinking about how that works. The audio waves stay with inside of the wax and the vinyl and things like that. That's really quite amazing. It's a miracle actually if you think about it. But Jingle Bells was the first real, apparently, Christmas song that was recorded specifically for the holiday season, and it was recorded on a wax cylinder and released in 1898, the same year as in France, completely different location, the Santa Claus movie short film was made. So really, again, 1800s, a lot of Christmas stuff came out of that century. If you're wondering where most of the stuff that we celebrate today came from in terms of Christmas, it came from the 1800s. And then the last thing we'll wrap up with is 1939. Now we're in the 1900s. Well, obviously, there's a lot of new stuff today since then, Elf on the Shelf and other things, but I haven't included those because they're very modern. They're very close to today's time. I wanted to get stuff that was really like way back in the day. This is the newest thing. Was in 1939, you had Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. So this is the last reindeer added to the original eight, which is in that the book that we spoke about from the 1800s. And this was a story by Robert L. May or Mays, whatever. And then eventually it would become, you know, a song in the 1940s, and that is where that originated from. But that was the last of the traditional things that we still celebrate today. I mean, it's all part of the culture. So when you look at all this stuff individually, you could say, yes, some of it does come from civilizations and cultures that were not Christian. Some of them were even evil or pagan. But there's a lot of stuff that we do today that we would be surprised where it originated from. Could have been, ancient Egypt, where they literally, sacrificed people to the gods and mummified them alive and all kinds of crazy things, or, other civilizations that were violent and wild. But just because something is done by somebody who's not good or evil or not a Christian doesn't mean that thing is now evil. And that's what I want the key takeaway to be here with this is just don't get so caught up in fearing or being totally against something that just because people that don't have good intentions are for it or doing it or in agreement with it. Try to enjoy the holiday. Try to enjoy Christmas for what it truly is about, the birth of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. And even if you're not a Christian, you could still celebrate that. But also, it's okay to have fun. It's okay to play pretend. It's okay to get to the fantasy of all this stuff. You know, it's and if you're a parent, you don't want to lie to your children and tell them that Santa Claus is real and that he's, you know, a person you got to behave for. And if you don't, you're not going to get toys and presents. And you don't want to mislead them. I do agree with some of what people say online, where if you lie to them about Santa and they find out he's not true, it might be hard to sell them on Jesus. And then maybe they later find out or just don't trust you anymore to believe that. It's best to not lie to your children. I don't lie to my children and just be honest with them. But it's okay to also enjoy the holidays play into the traditions, get involved, be happy. You don't have to be miserable. There's nothing in the Bible that says you have to be a miserable person to be a Christian, or you have to be perfect and have, not get to enjoy anything that's going on in the world, because that's, if you do, then somehow you're going against God or something. We're not called to be perfect. In fact, God through Christ came for the people who aren't perfect. Um, but it's okay to enjoy life. It's okay to have fun. It's okay to be happy and smile. And it's okay to partake in traditions as long as you keep your core Christ, and as long as you keep the Christmas holiday about him and make sure that that's clear to your loved ones, your children, if that's how you're raising them or whatever. And if it's, make it a part of your family where the main focus is Christ, then you can enjoy all the other stuff. And there's nothing wrong with it, because these are all things that we pile together throughout time as different civilizations. I mean, we've talked about many different cultures here. There were all these different things that kept getting added to the Christmas season. And it's sort of like a time capsule that we all share and keep adding to and then passing on to the next generation. So it's sort of a good thing. It's a good thing that we have this, because it allows us to continue to still stay connected to each other, especially through this holiday. Everybody around the world pretty much celebrates Christmas. It's no longer just one culture or one nation's holiday. It's a global holiday, which is a beautiful thing, because eventually that's what's supposed to happen with Christianity, is the whole world is supposed to have the opportunity to become Christians and believe and hear the message of the gospel. So I would just say, for this holiday season, I hope you're having a great time with your family, your friends, your loved ones. I hope you're eating a lot of delicious food. I hope you've taken the time to do something charitable. Doesn't have to be much. Could literally just be, you know, donating cans of food to your local shelter. But I hope that you take the time to do something charitable, something kind and generous, giving someone um, need a gift or help, because that is also a very Christian thing, and that's something that Saint Nicholas was known for, that eventually inspired Santa, that we all, you know, keep as part of the holiday tradition today. But the main thing is keep Christ in Christmas. Keep Christ in Christmas, and you can go and enjoy all the other things. That's it for this episode. I hope you got a lot of value out of it. I hope it was fun. I hope it was just a loose, fun episode where we did go a little deep on some stuff, but hopefully not too deep. I didn't want to make this too much of a thinker. Just wanted to have fun, enjoy the holiday season. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. We'll have a lot more for you. We're going to have another episode next week to wrap up this year. And then the next episode after that will be released in the new year. So we will see you in 2026. Have a great holiday, everybody. Merry Christmas, which we also need to bring back, and Happy New Year. And I wish you and your loved ones the best. That's it for this episode. Stay tuned for the next one. All right, everybody, I just want to take a moment to promote my children's book. This is Little Boy Full of Love. That's me on the back. And this is a little sneak peek on the inside. It's a great book. It's a children's book. I actually wrote this for my son. And it's available right now on Amazon, Walmart, Barnes & Noble, Indigo, Bookshop.org, and a lot of other online platforms. But more importantly to me, it's actually available in a lot of bookstores throughout the country. You can find out which ones are closest to you on my Instagram page. We highly recommend that you shop local, buy from a local bookstore. So if you are looking to, get a children's book for you or anybody you know, or even with the holidays coming up, it's a great time to, buy a children's book as a gift. Definitely get it from a bookstore that's local to you. But if you absolutely can't get it from one of the bookstores that are currently carrying it right now, and we're in about 15 or 16 different states across the country, so it may actually be in your state, and it could even be local to you. But if you can't get it from the physical bookstore, check out our Amazon storefront. The book's available on there right now. And like I said, with the holidays coming up, you may want to do your Christmas or Hanukkah or holiday shopping early, and you can even order it from our Amazon storefront and ship it directly to whoever you're gifting it to. But it's available on those platforms, Amazon storefront and bookstores and other websites that I mentioned. But I want to take a moment here to look at the storefront just to give you an idea of some other stuff that we have available on there. These are products that we highly recommend. They are things that we use in our daily lives, and it's all organized by category. So it's a lot easier to, shop for the holidays and specifically for things that interest you, particular categories. Available right now, many different items on our storefront. If you can see here, 61 items just in women's apparel, fall decor, because right now we're in fall, 26 items, kitchen items, baking specifically, things for around the house, children's toys, even stuff for parties. If you're trying to save money on a party and throwing your own, occasion, you can even buy some cool gadgets here to help you, put on a better party. Health and wellness items here, even stuff for Christmas. And there's the book right there. So you can get it from the storefront. You can get it from the bookstores, like I mentioned. But it's available on all these different platforms. It's really easy to find and gift to somebody. Also, I want to show you the apparel shop, and these are some clothing items that we actually produced. So if you're looking to get some cool apparel items, shirts, hoodies, long sleeve, short sleeve, leggings, even accessories, cell phone cases, women's makeup bags, fanny packs, coffee mugs, all different types of stuff, even some, art, all different categories here, apparel, homeware, accessories, drinks, even digital items. It's all on this store, healthybodygoodssoul.com. Anything that pertains to you or somebody that you're looking to get a gift for the holidays. A lot of great designs on here, a lot of cool designs that we actually custom created. Stainless steel water bottles, especially now with the fall and winter. A lot of cool hoodies and long sleeve shirts. This is a really cool one, I think, for women. The original Be Your Soul apparel, that one's actually really popular. People tend to like that. This one's one of my favorites. The free shirt. It's the American flag, and it says free, and that says not property of the United States government. That one's pretty cool. Got all different types of tank tops, hoodies, long sleeve, short sleeve, tote bags, coffee mugs, even some items for kids, backpacks. So if you're the type that likes to, plan ahead, I would definitely recommend ordering from the Amazon storefront or the apparel shop within the next couple of weeks to get everything in time for the holidays. Use code SAVE15 on the apparel shop to save 15% off everything on the storefront. So order within the next week or two, and you'll definitely have everything in time for the holidays. Definitely check out all the links to everything, the Amazon storefront, the book, and the apparel shop in my bio on all my platforms, Rumble, YouTube, Instagram, Spotify. But you can also find them in all the show notes for every episode that I post and get all your orders in time for the holidays. All right, that's it for this video. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. It helps the channel continue to grow. And put in the comments things that you would like me to talk about and make videos on for the future. And I will definitely do my best to do that. Stay tuned for the next one.